The auctioneer's hammer struck the wooden block with a crack that echoed through Ash Hollow Square like the sound of a coffin lid shutting. Ada Whitlow stood frozen in the February cold. Her jaw clenched as the words rang out. The Whitlow Ranch, 60 acres of grazing land her late husband had poured his life into, was gone. Sold for a pittance to the Northern Pacific Railway Company. Sold. Judge Silas Dornay bellowed from the podium, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. His fat fingers reached for the next deed, his small eyes never leaving Ada. There was satisfaction there, cold and sharp as the wind that whipped at his gray whiskers. Beside her, 12-year-old Finn pressed close, trembling. His shoulders were narrow beneath his threadbare coat, his chin stubborn like their father's, but his eyes shone with tears. He tried hard to hide. "That's our land," he whispered hoarsely. "P worked that land." "Hush," Ada murmured, though her throat burned with the same fury. She wrapped an arm around him, keeping her gaze steady. Around them, townsfolk shifted uneasily. Some turned away in shame, unwilling to meet her eyes. Others stared, hollow and defeated, too used to losing against men like Dornay. And standing watch, the Copper Wolves, Dornay's hired guns, circled the square. Their leader, McCree, spat tobacco near Ada's boots, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver. Judge Dornay descended from his platform, his fine San Francisco coat gleaming in the dusty winter light. He approached her with the easy arrogance of a man who believed he owned everything. He set his eyes on Mrs. Whitlow, he said, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Unfortunate business, losing one's home. But perhaps we might discuss alternative arrangements." Ada's spine stiffened. She knew what he meant. Other widows had taken his protection, only to be bound in ways worse than chains. She lifted her chin. "I'd sooner share a pit with rattlesnakes." A flicker of cold anger passed through Dornay's eyes, though his smile never faltered. "Pride is costly, my dear, especially with a boy to feed, and winter closing in." He leaned closer, his breath heavy with whiskey. The sheriff mentioned missing courthouse records, tampering with seals, serious accusations. Ada's blood chilled. She had hidden those very documents, proof of Dornay's falsified land claims beneath the floorboards of her home, a home no longer hers. "I don't know anything about missing papers," she said flatly. "Of course not." Dornay straightened, brushing invisible dust from his lapel. "Still, Sheriff Pike will want to search. Thorinores, you understand." The trap was snapping shut. Ada felt it in the way the Copper Wolves shifted, cutting off any path out of the square. "Come on, Finn," she whispered, gripping his hand. "We'll pack what's ours." But Sheriff Pike stepped out of the courthouse, his badge flashing in the pale sun. Two deputies flanked him. "Mrs. Whitlow," he called, "a word if you please." Ida's heart hammered. She bent low to Finn. "When I say run, you run for the old mining road. Don't look back." The boy's face was pale but determined. He nodded once. Pike drew closer, resting his hand on his gun belt. "Reports say you've stolen documents. You'll come with me quiet or it'll get ugly." The townspeople slipped away one by one, unwilling to watch. Even Mrs. Morrison, who'd once brought soup when Henry lay dying, turned her back and vanished into the store. A shoved Finn hard. "Run," she cried, flinging a handful of dirt into Pike's face. The sheriff cursed, clawing at his eyes. Aya hitched her skirts and ran. Boots thundered behind her. A gunshot cracked the air. She didn't turn. She sprinted for the mining road, lungs burning, skirts heavy with ice. Snow flurries stung her face as the storm that had threatened all morning finally broke. Behind her, hooves pounded. McCridry and two riders crested the ridge. She stumbled down a frozen creek bed, crashing onto the ice. Pain jolted her shoulder, but she forced herself up. The storm howled, hiding her, but also promising death if she didn't find shelter. Her hands found a carved post beneath the snow. The trapper's mark Henry had once shown her. She crawled toward the shadow it pointed to, half blind in the swirling white. Alina clung to a cluster of boulders. She shoved inside, gasping, half frozen, and stopped. "Don't move," a voice said from the shadows. A tall man stepped forward, rifle leveled. His hair was long, his beard thick, and his gray eyes colder than the storm outside. Scars crisscrossed his throat and hands, proof of battle survived. "I'm not armed," Ada said, her voice shaking. The man listened to the wind outside, then lowered his rifle slightly. "How many after you?" "3, maybe more. My brother's out there. He's only 12. He's smart." "Yes. Then he'll find shelter." The man studied her wound where blood seeped through her coat. He stepped closer, his movement steady and sure. "You're hurt." He pulled aside her coat with surprising gentleness. Up close, she saw his scars clearer. This was a man carved by violence. "Caleb Hart," he said at last, "and you're Ada Whitlow. I've seen you in town." "Widow off the Whitlow place." "Least you were. You watched the auction," she whispered. "I watch everything," he said simply. Outside, voices shouted, "Closer now." Mickreed's growl rose above the storm. "They'll find me," Ada whispered. "Let them try," Caleb answered, calm as stone. He pressed an embroidered handkerchief into her hand for the bleeding. "Stay down." Then he slipped out into the storm like a shadow. Ada pressed a cloth to her wound, her heart hammering. She could hear her own breath, the storm, the muffled voices of men searching. And for the first time since the hammer fell in Ash Hollow, she felt a fragile spark of hope. The storm howled through the mountains like a living thing, throwing snow sideways and swallowing sound. Ida crouched inside the shelter, her shoulder throbbing beneath the handkerchief Caleb had given her. She had never been more aware of her own heartbeat, each thud loud in her ears as she listened for the gunman outside. Time stretched like wire about to snap. Then, after what felt like forever, the door flap pushed open. Caleb slipped back inside, his coat dusted with snow, his rifle slung low, his gray eyes scanned her quickly, then the fire pit. "They are gone," he said simply. Ada sagged in relief, though her body still trembled. How they know better than to fight the mountain in a storm. "They'll circle back when the weather clears." He knelt at the fire pit and struck flint against steel. Soon, a small flame crackled, casting shadows against the rough walls. The warmth spread slowly, but it was enough to stop her shaking. Ada studied him in the flickering light. His scars told a story she couldn't read yet, but his hands, steady as he fed the fire, were not cruel hands. "Why? Help me," she asked softly. Caleb didn't look up. "Because you're not the first widow Dornay tried to break. And because I've got my own reasons for seeing him fall." He glanced at her then, and in his eyes she saw something deeper, darker, a memory that weighed heavy. Ada pressed her lips together. She wanted to ask, but his expression told her not tonight. Instead, she said, "My brother Finn, I told him to run. He'll head for the mission. Sister Eugenia will take him." And Caleb nodded. "Smart boy. Well, find him when the storm breaks." Silence settled between them, broken only by the fire and the shriek of the wind outside. Ada tried not to think of Dornay's men waiting, tried not to imagine Finn alone in the cold. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to focus on the fire's crackle. Caleb rummaged through his pack and produced a small flask. Without warning, he poured whiskey over her shoulder wound. Adia bit back a scream, biting into her glove. Stars exploded behind her eyes. Need stitching, Caleb said bluntly. He pulled a needle and thread from his kit. This will hurt. Do it, Ada whispered, bracing herself. His hands were steady, practiced. Each stitch tugged fire through her shoulder, but she stayed still. He worked in silence, his scarred face focused when he tied off the thread. At last, his voice softened. You held still. Not many do. I've patched worse in the war. She admitted I was a nurse once. He studied her hands, the calluses, and faint stains. Then he gave a small nod. Thought so. Quote, for the first time, a flicker of respect passed between them. Ida leaned back, exhausted, but stronger. She wrapped herself in the wool blanket he handed her. The smell of campfire and leather clung to it. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the Leonto, something shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. By morning, the storm had broken, leaving the world buried in white. Caleb stamped out the fire, packed his gear, and handed her a tin of bitter coffee. Today we move, he said. We find your brother, then we deal with Dornay. Deal with him how? Ada asked. Caleb's gray eyes met hers. With proof, with fire, with whatever it takes. Ada touched the hidden pocket inside her coat where her documents rested. She thought of Dornay's sneer, the way the town had turned its back and Finn's frightened face. Her jaw set. Then we make sure he doesn't win. Caleb gave a single nod. Good. Then let's ride. They stepped out into the morning light together. Two hunted souls bound by more than survival. Now the mountain air was sharp, the snow blinding, but their path was clear. And somewhere ahead, Judge Silas Dornay was waiting. The trail wound through the snowy hills like a scar, sharp and unforgiving. Ada rode close behind Caleb, her shoulder aching. With each jolt of the horse's gait, but the pain was nothing compared to the storm inside her chest. Every turn of the trail, every shadow among the trees, she expected to see Dornay's men. By midday, they reached Sister Eugenia's mission. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and the little bell above the doorway rang in the cold wind. Finn burst from the doorway before Ada even dismounted. His face was flushed, his hair wild, but he was safe. She nearly collapsed as she pulled him into her arms. I knew you'd come. Finn mumbled against her coat. I promised I would, Ida said, holding him tight. Caleb stood a little apart, his rifle still in his hand, scanning the treant. Even here, his gray eyes never rested. Inside the mission, warmth and safety wrapped around them. Sister Eugenia's lined face softened as she tended Ada's wound properly. An old crow warrior named Running Bear sat by the fire. His dark eyes thoughtful. Dornay's men search everywhere. Running Bear said in careful English. They offer money for news of you. They call you a thief. I stole nothing, Ada answered. Her voice was stronger now, steadier. I have proof of Dornay's crimes. Real proof. Quote. Caleb set the leather pouch of documents on the table. Running Bear leaned forward, producing more papers from his own satchel, old treaty records, contracts, ledgers. When laid together, the picture became clear. Judge Silas Dornay had built his empire on lies, fraud, and blood. This could bring him down. Ada whispered, if it reaches the right hands, Caleb said, but the road to Helena is watched. Dornay has men everywhere. Well, send it further. Running Bear said to Billings. To Washington. A fire that wide even. Dornay cannot smother. Sister Eugenia nodded. But first you must live long enough to deliver it. Ada glanced at Finn. His small shoulders were straight. His chin lifted. He was trying to be brave, but his eyes betrayed the fear he carried. She placed a hand on his cheek. I'll see this through. For you, for Henry, for everyone. Dornay has broken. That night, as snow fell again, Caleb kept watch by the fire. Ada lay awake, listening to his quiet movements. He was a man carved by hardship, scarred by memories he didn't speak of. Yet, when he caught her gaze across the fire, there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not just determination, not just anger, something softer, something she hadn't dared to hope for. By dawn, the mission was alive with movement. Plans had been made. Running Bear would create diversions to scatter Dornay's men. Sister Eugenia would spread word among the townsfolk, and Caleb and Ada would ride, carrying the evidence through the back trails toward Billings. But Dornay was already waiting. They were barely a mile from the mission when gunfire cracked through the trees. Horses screamed. Finn shouted as riders thundered out of the woods. McCready led them, his scar twisted into a grin. "Run!" Caleb barked, firing his rifle. The first rider fell. Another reeled back, clutching his side. Ada shoved Finn toward the mission. "Go! Don't stop!" Quote. But McCready's men were too fast. They swept Finn up like a sack of grain, hauling him onto a saddle. His terrified cry tore through the air. "Finn!" Ida screamed. She spurred her horse forward, but Caleb caught her reins hard. "Don't!" His gray eyes burned into hers. "They'll use him to bait you. That's what they want. They already have him." Ida's voice broke. "That's my brother, Caleb. My only family." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we'll take him back, but not by running blind into their trap. We'll do it smart or we lose him. And you." Ada's hands shook on the reins, torn between fury and despair. But when she met Caleb's eyes, steady as stone, she forced herself to breathe, to think. "Then tell me how," she whispered. "We make a stand," he said, "not for land. Not just for your brother, for every soul Dora has crushed. This ends here." Ada looked back at the smoke rising from Ash Hollow in the distance. The town that had turned its back on her. The town that Dornay ruled with lies and fear. "No," she said, her voice hardening. "It ends there in front of everyone. The truth laid bare where no one can look away." Caleb's lips pressed into a thin line, then curved into something close to a grim smile. "Then we drag the judge into his own square. And we make the people see who he really is." The snow swirled around them, cold and sharp. But Ada felt something warm kindle inside her. Not just hope, not just fury, resolve. They would fight. They would risk everything.